Sure. You are listening to a career advice webinar by the Royal Australian Chemical Institute, the Professional Association for Chemists in Australia. I am Dr. Yvonne Ma, a member of RACI and working at BSF Australia in Business Development Plastic Additives. We are excited to present this, our flagship webinar for the 2021 Careers Thursday series, celebrating diversity success in STEM careers. Our three panelists tonight are all luminaries in their fields, and we are extremely fortunate to be able to bring together three people of such achievement for this event. Before we start this evening's panel session, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting all around Australia. We recognise the elders, past, present and emerging, and also recognise their contributions as Australia's first scientists and engineers, building a healthy and safe community, what they have done and what we can still learn from their ways. We would like to also thank the sponsors of RACI's Careers Development Program, DCS Technical, Envirolab and Laboratory Credit Union. Introducing our panelists tonight, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Kathy Foley, Order of Australia, Australia's Chief Scientist, a distinguished physicist and CSIRO's Chief Scientist. Dr. Kathy Foley was appointed as the Chief Scientist earlier this year. Already a highly regarded and accomplished scientist, Dr. Foley is a champion of diversity and inclusion in STEM. She has successfully worked to build strategies to effect change and make significant contributions to Australian science. Next, we have Dr. Kelvin Kong. He is a member of the Worimi people of Port Stephens, north of Newcastle, Australia's first Aboriginal Fellow of the Australian College of Surgeons. Dr. Kong is passionate in addressing inequality and into improving the ear health of Indigenous children. He makes regular trips to Australia's remote regions to provide ear health services that would not otherwise be available. Professor Separovic is our Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Chemistry, Deputy Director of the Bio 21 Institute and former Head of School at the University of Melbourne. With more than 230 publications, her contributions to biophysics and NMR, that's nuclear magnetic resonance, have been recognized with a slew of awards and fellowships. Dr. Separovic was named an IUPAC Distinguished Woman of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering in 2019, as well as winning RACI's Margaret Shield Leadership Award and was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia in the same year. We're going to start this evening's panel with some opening remarks from Dr. Foley. We then have a list of questions in advance, but we do welcome our audience to ask questions using the Q&A tab function, and we'll do our best to answer at least some of the questions. Over to you, Dr. Foley. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen, and just because I'm a scientist, I can't talk unless I've got slides in front of me. So I'm going to also begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I am. I'm on the lands of the Cammeraygal people, which is in the northern part of Sydney, just up towards Ku-ring-gai National Park. And I want to pay my respects to the custodians of these lands and the lands of where we all are across Australia or across Victoria and in New South Wales tonight. I also want to acknowledge the elders who are caring for those lands and pay my respects to the old ones who've come before and the young ones who are going to follow. So I'm so pleased that progress that I've been asked to talk about celebrating diversity. And I've been pleased to see that progress that we have made has been both in real work conditions and also bringing the concept of diversity to front and centre. So I thought just let you know that last week I finished hosting with Sarah Madison as my co-chair from Swinburne University. We finished hosting the International Women in Physics Conference. And boy, was that a real eye-opener. It was digital, and I'm just showing you our Gather World that we created and ran our program on. But we were able to link over 300 women from over nearly 60 countries around the world. And boy, was it an eye-opener, because I was able to see for the first time how much progress we really have made in Australia. And just as an advertisement, letting you know that you can go and see the outcomes from this conference in the graphic scribing, which is on the Twitter handle of our UPAT Women. I really urge you to go and see it there, because one of the things we've found is that, that even in Australia, and we've made a lot of progress, the 2021 Global Gender Report estimates that it's still going to take more than 130 years for us to close the gender gap worldwide, and that's with our current rate of progress. So I actually think we can do better than that. And earlier this month, I had the great honor to actually talk to some high school girls under the Curious Minds program. And they actually asked me if I'd ever faced injustice in the workplace. And unfortunately, I did have to say yes. But I also told them that progress has been made, especially in the light of what I saw last week when I was talking to women from Africa, South America, and many other countries. And so I told them about the progress. For example, when my mother, who was an architect, had children, she was forced to resign. Now, of course, we've got to a point where we can work and have families. And so even in that time, since I've been in the workforce, I've seen tangible change. And I'll give you an example. When I was expecting my first child, there was no childcare. So this is a picture of a childcare centre, which I actually helped build, and then was a treasurer of it for 7 years in order to create childcare, because in the Ku-ring-gai area in Sydney, and actually in much of Sydney, there was no long day care. And this, my eldest son is 32, and so things have changed a lot. We've now got childcare centres just about on every corner. Only problem is they're unbelievably expensive, and so that's another issue. But also for a long time, I was the only female in my line management. In fact, I guess you could say the next level manager who was female was the Queen on many an occasion, because I worked for a government lab. And I've also seen, and this is something which I am very excited about, especially after the International Women's Conference last week, the International Women in Physics Conference, was I've seen the idea of diversity in science, technology, engineering, and maths go from obscurity and something which was seen as, you know, those women pushing their barrow, to being something which is a high priority for government, and where they're putting a lot of resources in order to try and see how they can make sure that it's possible for us to be able to embrace the full human potential. So I told those students that we're working to make sure that what they experience when they get to be in the workforce will be a lot better than what we've experienced, even though in comparison to other places in the world, it's not so bad. So I'm saying we can't rest on our laurels. Now, it's easy to hear diversity in STEM meaning women only. And that's a really important group, that there's much more to it. And I think if we're crummy at gender equity, I think we're going to be even crummier in the other areas. And it's holding us back, because we need to make sure that we embrace the full human potential in all our activities. But one of the things which we've found is that how we make pathways accessible to everyone. So we start off where we have inequality, where someone has an advantage, say a box to stand on, and so they can see over what should have been a fence. And then we have equality, where we give everybody the same level of advantage, but there'll still be someone who is too short to be able to see over the fence. So then we've got the idea of equity, where we give advantage or support to people who might need a step up so they can see over the fence. But I want to think, how can we get to the point where we actually have no barriers, that we remove the fence? Why can't we design our science careers to be the way that we need, so that there are no barriers? I know for those of us who have done PhDs, it probably leaves you in poverty and uncertainty in your early careers, and it's not an attractive pathway. But what if we remove the barriers so that we don't have to have a career path like that? And we've seen in the COVID period that it's allowed us to provide new ways of working. And so I guess it's something which has given us a chance to stop and reflect and think, how can we change the way science, technology, engineering, maths, how that changes has changed the way we operate, so that we think about redoing the whole way we think about science and how we work, so that we can remove those barriers and make sure we embrace the full human potential.
Dr. Foley, that was very, very interesting. Thank you. Just on a personal experience in this category, I'm just going to put the first question out. We're here to celebrate success. So to start on that happy note, which of your successes give you the most pleasure? So would you like me to, I'll go around. Maybe I'll start with Dr. Foley because she was talking already. So, and then I'll go to Frances and then Kelvin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's given me most pleasure in my work? Actually, what gives me most pleasure is being in a situation where I can effect change that has allowed others to do better. And working in a team and helping and supporting others so that they are able to excel and do things which I could never dream of doing is where I really feel like I've made a difference. And that probably makes me the happiest is doing that. That's probably my favorite thing, is actually seeing others develop and just run in ways which I could never dream of.
That's lovely. Frances.
Well, I'm going to talk more personally than work. So I interpret it a different way. And for me, the thing that I'm most proud of and given me both pleasure and hardship was raising my son on my own. I think back to that 20-year-old and how brave and hardworking she was. And I can't believe that was me. So that's something that I'm extremely proud of. And something kind of related to work, but also diversity, is I was on a scholarship committee. And I was really arguing hard for this refugee kid to get this scholarship. And it was really, really hard work. And I got it through. And I got him, into because they only gave 10 of them. And it was for the top 10. And he got it. And a few years later, I read something. And I argued that he was a leader because in the refugee camp, he organised a cricket match between the guards and the refugees on Anzac Day. Oh. I just thought that was amazing. Anyway, he gets this scholarship. So a few years later, I'm reading the newspaper and this kid got an award. And he was saying, because he's a man now, that he's very grateful to the University of Melbourne for giving him a scholarship and he was able to bring his family out. And I'm just so proud that I did that. I played a role in that, right? That's so rewarding.
That's really, really lovely. And Kelvin, our question was about, we're here to celebrate success. So in all your successes, which one gave you the most pleasure?
It's a really hard question to ask because there's so many things that brought so much pleasure in my career. If I go back to some of the conversations being had, and particularly with Dr. Foley's presentation, one of the important things I think I see is just being represented. And if I go back to one of my most beautiful stories that I often tell is one of my first Aboriginal patients I looked after when I finished medicine. And it took quite a lot to get through medicine, a lot of stress, a lot of work. And my nan and my mum were really hard pushing me. And one of the most beautiful things I saw when I saw this elderly patient emergency was I really want to do a good job. And for those who know medicine and hospitals at all, emergency departments are very chaotic and very busy. So for me, it was about sitting down, taking a time, find some quiet space, having a beautiful chat to her and learning about her family and examining what's going on. And after I examined her, she just started crying. And it took a while for her to calm down from crying. And it just broke my heart. And here I was thinking in my mind, I'm going to get wailed by my nan because I've actually upset this beautiful elderly lady. And it wasn't until she calmed down that she said to me, I never thought I'd live the day to be able to be treated by an Aboriginal doctor.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And what's really and heartening about that is that she did not know me. She didn't know my family. She didn't know who I was. It was purely about this representation that we talk about and this diversity, how important diversity is, because here's a woman with the trauma that she must have been through her whole life to even think about getting some simple thing called medical help, which we all think we're very open in the medical field. She was actually heartbroken by this. And it still touches me this day how important that is. And I think for me, in terms of what we talk about when we talk about diversity, it's about representing the community and about making sure that everyone in the Australian community, because we live in this beautiful country where we feel very safe, should feel safe. Should feel like that they can seek help, should feel that they don't feel disregarded their concerns. I think that's really important for me. So probably from a enlightening point of view, seeing those kind of similar stories make me smile every day.
Thank you. And just on that topic with you, Shoal Bay was a pretty disadvantaged area during the 1980s. With high unemployment and a lot of social problems. What role has that local disadvantage as well as indigenous disadvantage in Australia more generally played in your early life, Dr. Kong?
Oh, a huge part. And I think for that reason, I think it gives us that drive and be able to achieve what we've done. When I was a young child, my mother used to treat all our family. She was a nurse, one of our early Aboriginal nurses. And so everyone from our family and our extended family, when I say family, I smile because that means a whole lot of people, not just the immediate nuclear family, coming around for Band-Aids, for suture removals, for chats about immunisations, about education advice, about science advice, about all these kind of things, because my mother was considered one of the learned in the community. And it wasn't until I got to high school that you start thinking retrospectively, well, hang on, why are they coming and bothering us? At first, it was a novel thing where my sisters and I would actually fight over who would help mum. Then became a passion of, well, hang on, my non-Indigenous friends, many of which are still great friends now, don't do that. If they have an issue, they go to the hospital. If they have a science question, they'll go and ask the science teacher. If they have a careers advice, they go to career advice. Whereas everyone came to mum no matter what the topic was. And it really showed me the disparity and the fear and the trepidation people have in actually presenting to actually ask these kind of simple questions. And that really drove that strive for bringing back to this equality, that we don't have to put up with this, that it should be open for everyone. If a hospital is built for our community, then surely everyone should access it. Why is it only a certain person or a certain percentage of the population access this? And what are those barriers? What are those structural things that are stopping us from doing those? And those things are very pertinent in that area. So yeah, it played a huge part in shaping me, but also in the work that I do today in making sure that we address those issues so that everyone can get that access.
That's really, really good. Thank you. Next question, and maybe I'll go to Frances now. Going back to the beginning, what did you have in mind for your career, and then how did you develop it?
I didn't have a career in mind, and it wasn't something that I felt was accessible to me. So even though I was good at school, like my dad went to first grade, my mum went to second grade. So I always go, I'm the first person in my family to finish primary school. So I sort of thought, I'd love to be a princess. That didn't look like a good career move. Then I thought air hostess, but I was too short. But that was a way of seeing the world. And it wasn't really till I had my son that I really got motivated, and that made me work. And I was just lucky. I stumbled into a job at CSIRO, and that was, what set me off. I just tried really hard, and I didn't have an option to not make it work. It had to work because otherwise, we'd be stuck with Weet-Bix and oranges for the rest of our lives. And so literally, that's what we were living on for a while. Mm-hmm. And so, so I just worked hard at what I did, and I managed to pull through. And then I started to see a career path. And I mentioned in the preamble that Cathy used to work in a lab next to me. And she was such an inspiration because she was this highly educated woman. I didn't think that women had PhDs or did PhDs. And she was somebody who did that, and she was accessible and just a normal person as well. So I think that probably helped, but really I was driven by financial gain.
But I think also having that vision of seeing Cathy around you, and maybe also just not many few women around, but it kind of drove you.
Yeah, and she was younger as well. So there was the occasional woman with a PhD at CSIRO, but they were ancient, whereas Cathy was a young, inspiring woman. So I suppose that's a role model.
Right. It's probably about 27 or 8 at that stage.
Yeah. Child, yeah.
My kids are even older than that. My gosh.
So for you, Cathy, how about you? Like, what did you have in mind back in the beginning about your career, and then how did you develop it?
Well, I guess like a classic young girl, I thought about being a hairdresser when I was in high school. I actually went through one period of time where I actually had come from a middle-class family. My parents were well educated. My mum was an architect. My dad was an accountant. So I've actually been brought up with quite a lot of privilege. But with that, I also was brought up with a strong sort of Irish Catholic background, where the idea was that when you have privilege, you actually have great expectations to make a difference and to use that in ways for good. And that was something which was really driven to me, particularly when I was about 16, which I guess is a very formative time in your life. So I actually had this idea. I wanted to make a difference and save the world. Which is a little bit presumptuous of me, but realizing that I was lucky. I went to a good school, and I was never experienced poverty, hunger, disadvantage in any way, really. I guess the biggest disadvantage was being female, which I just never thought that, because my mum was a fantastic role model, and my older sister was as well. And so it was really interesting, where I was actually protected from a lot of those disadvantages, and so I just had no concept that there was no other way than just having some sort of pathway to do good, and it was just trying to figure out what was that. So originally I was going to be a high school teacher, and it was only but I loved science, and I really loved the idea of doing science. But I also thought that I wanted to be a teacher to really go out. At one stage, I worked with Indigenous people in Bourke just after high school. And I decided then that I wanted to not be someone who worked on the one-to-one. Because I felt frustrated that I was helping out one person, I wanted to be one-to-many. So I actually thought I wanted to change the system. And that was probably a really important point and point in my life, was realizing that. So it's sort of, I went to university. I chose Macquarie University because it was close to where I lived, and I used to have to catch a train to school. I also chose it because my boyfriend at the time was going there, and he left and became a Maris priest, so that wasn't necessarily a good choice. Anyway, that didn't matter. It was part of the decisions you make, but it ended up being a really good university for me, because it had a very strong pastoral care component to the way they educated there. And so as a consequence, I felt supported, which is pretty unusual, I think. And I majored in physics because I loved it. I didn't think I was all that good at it, but it was one where I felt comfortable, and they had barbecues and social events. I had my moments of, sort of probably too much male attention, because I had a lot of men who I was the only female they ever saw. So they thought being friendly meant I was interested with them romantically. But I learned to manage that. And eventually I did my diploma in education, and my first year physics lecturer encouraged me. In fact, after I finished my degree, she saw me in the car park and said, "What are you doing next? Go be a teacher." And she said, "No, go and do honours. You'll be great. You'll get a scholarship. You'll get first class honours, a scholarship. You'll do a PhD, and you'll be a great scientist." And that really put me on my pathway of thinking, I can do this. Just those words, I'd never before thought that was possible. And I was a B+ student as an undergraduate, but when I really knew what I wanted to do, I started getting the high marks because I was focused and really wanted to deliver. And then I applied for a job in the newspaper at CSIRO, where I really wanted to work, because I loved the mission of doing an organisation where it was trying to do good stuff and change the world for good. And I got a job there, and 36 years later, I was still there until I finally, and I was invited to be Chief Scientist of Australia, which is phenomenal. But, the whole time through CSIRO, it wasn't as though I had a particular path in mind. It was more a case of things came up. I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I'll have a go. And it's taking the most of opportunities that turn up.
Oh, thank you. That's a really nice, interesting. I think most of us all feel like this, Cathy, Frances. Kelvin, what about you? How did you, going back to the beginning, thinking about your career then, did you have anything in mind back then, and then how did you develop it?
No, absolutely no idea. And it's interesting how we kind of meander, and it's really nice to hear that we all have this inspiration from people, and when we see stuff we can believe in and see stuff we can chase, it really has that positive strength to it. Certainly for me, knowing that we wanted to give back and change the world, and why is it our family were enduring all these health statistics, was something that was pertinent in our minds, and my sisters and I, and you probably should have my sisters on here rather than me, Dave, but my sisters are both medicos as well. They're senior to me. And we went to a university function on diversity and education and academia, and it was one of the most inspiring sessions where we had Professor Sandra Eads and Dr. Lewis Peachy, both who were medical students then, talking to a large room of Aboriginal kids about chasing a career in academia. And it wasn't before that we even thought that this was possible. That for us growing up, the only success we saw in the media for Aboriginal people was sport. And so for us to actually acknowledge that there's something bigger and something different, and that's something that was really achievable and that we could actually give back to the world, was really exciting for us. And so for us, I think that really chased it. So my sisters and I really pursued and thought about how we could give back. Now, of course, when we started thinking that, the first thing that's always put onto us is, well, you'll be a good health worker, or you'll be a good tradie, or you'll be able to help out. There was never those aspirations of, you know what, chase your dreams and dream higher and achieve higher. You can do that. And I think it was from being around those Aboriginal academics that really pushed you harder about, it's not the status quo to sit there and expect the stereotype of not achieving. You can achieve, you just got to put your mind to it. And that really pushed that drive, and our careers kind of meandered that way. And we're just very, very fortunate that we pushed into medicine, and very happy in that space.
Thank you. So with your current roles now, what do you love about it? Maybe I'll start with Cathy.
Well, I am in a really privileged position. It's terrifying at times because I think, wow, how did I get here as being Australia's chief scientist? But I have incredible convening power. I can bring groups of people together because I have this sheriff badge that says chief scientist on it. And even though it's just still me, and I still, do the ironing on Sunday nights and like to make cakes and, vacuum the floor and clean the toilets like everybody else, I have this amazing opportunity to see how, all the way growing up, you think, if I were king or queen, this is what I'd do if I was in charge. And now I've got that chance. And not that I've actually not got control over things. I don't hold the levers to do change, but it's like I'm in this special position of being the Kim Kardashian of Australia for science by being a serious influencer. So my job is to actually be there to give government the best possible advice. And to do that, of course, I don't know all the science. So I have to reach out to the whole research community. And I love being able to do that, being able to have government say, I need information about this. And I can just make contact with anybody and be able to, and it's given me a lot of confidence to actually pick up the phone in a way which I would never have done before. I felt too timid. So it's amazing having that badge. It's almost like you're sort of hiding behind a mask, but boy, I'm making the most of that. And then the other one is actually looking at things where system changes, where I want to see how we can make the research sector in Australia work better, from looking at career pathways, looking at the way we have access to research literature, looking at critical technologies, and looking at career pathways. And that's one of the things which for me is a major interest area and something I'm working on, is saying, how can we make sure that we set up the research careers to not just be a narrow viewpoint of pathway to being a research academic or someone in a university, but seeing that there's an enormous number of roles in other different areas. So that if you look at what's happening and where future opportunities are for careers, it's exciting to see that science, technology, engineering, maths are all areas where we need lots and lots of people. And so it may not be the same sort of traditional sort of scientific pathway you've thought of in the past, but I want to see if we can set it up so that we've got more opportunities to go into industry, but you can still be a true scientist, or have more movement between academia, government labs, industry, government, and see that working together. So there's sort of things that are really making me very excited about being in this role.
Yeah, thank you. Margaret Thatcher was a physicist, or was it chemist? Chemist.
Yeah, she worked on Langmuir Blodgett films and Gramercyton.
Yeah. Frances, what about you? What do you love about your current role?
Look, when Cathy started talking, I thought, that's what I was well, only partly going to say, but influencing. And I think it's great. I suffer enormously from imposter syndrome, and I can see there's a question about that. So I'm going to try and answer that at the same time. So, getting awards and rewards sort of helps me a little bit with the imposter syndrome, right? So, I must be okay. Somebody else thinks I am. So, I've just got over the bar. But now that I'm retired, it gives me this ability to devote more time to influencing. And I do take that quite much more seriously. That was the reason I went to Antarctica with 100 women. It was to learn how to communicate a bit better, and I'm still learning, and I'm still putting myself out there. I don't like putting myself out there, but I feel that's what I have to do to give back to this community. Okay, we complain about how tough it is being a scientist and everything, but it's given me so much joy. It's been so rewarding to go to work, not every day, most days when you can't wait to get to work and oh no, I've got to go home now. When you're working on something that you're really interested in, and then other times it's really awful. But there are days where you're just so excited about it, and that's just the most wonderful experience. And there was another question here asking about what really got us interested in science. So the thing that got me really interested, I mentioned at first, I was doing it because of the money, right? It was a job and it put food on the table. And then I started studying and got more and more into it. And I still remember when I did my honours, and this was like the moment for me. I was just straight out theory. I did an experiment and I got a certain spectrum, and then I had to simulate this spectrum. So you got this Hamiltonian, these things that you only learn about at university, you don't think they really exist. And I had to look how a spin half was coupled to a spin 3 on 2. And I'm sitting there working this all out, and I put it into a computer, literally 3 a.m. in the morning. It spits out the spectrum that looks like the thing that I got experimentally. And theory and experiment just match. And I just started to weep. And I thought, I've just suddenly seen inside the universe. It was really just such an inspiring moment. And I've never had anything like that since. But anyway, it set me on the path. And, occasionally I almost get tears, but not because it's just such a wonderful result. It's because it's not happening. But, most of the time it is a good job, and it's just been a wonderful career. And I want to let other people enjoy that.
I'm feeling the passion coming through from Kathy and Frances. Kelvin, how about you?
I have the best job. I have the best job in the world, and I think it's endearing to hear the stories. And I guess I first want to say that one of the nice things hearing both the panellists, and I admire Cathy Foley's work quite a lot for a long time, and nice to meet Frances and reading some of the stuff, is they're both humans, and it's nice to have that human touch to it. And I think that kind of fades into when we talk about imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is really just the way that society's valuing you and making you feel about a thing, when in actual fact, you're pretty deadly, pretty cool, pretty amazing. And I think that's really important. From a work point of view, I've never chased any financial rewards for my job. I think I've always just wanted a job, and not realising, and certainly for a lot of my family and a lot of community workers, is that we've come from quite extreme poverty. And I don't want to delve into too much of that kind of stuff, but so having a job and just having an income where you can actually go out for dinner or go to the movies has been so important from that perspective. And I certainly really encourage people who are listening is that the thing you need to chase is your passion. And at first, you're not going to get lots of financial rewards for that. But when you actually get a really good passion, you chase your dreams, you'll get your job you want, you'll land your dream job, and you'll do well. And the most important part of that, which is a bit of a cliche in doing that, is that you go to work and you don't realize you're going to work earning money. I go to work, I get in pajamas, we call them scrubs. I put music on, I help people. I do research around it. I translate some of that research to improve the outcomes of people. And when I get exciting cases or doing some fun things there, I'm actually getting up earlier and getting excited about it. My wife thinks I'm nuts, but it's a really, really cool thing. And I think when you have that kind of passion and drive, you'll just become naturally happy with that. And if you're not chasing that kind of thing, you're going to get very stressed, very burnt out, because I think in all the STEM careers, there's a high burnout because it's very stressful work. So you really need to be passionate about what you're doing.
Thank you. Just before we go into the next section, which is around diversity, I just want to touch on some of the questions in the Q&A so we can just cover everyone's curiosity. There's one here for Dr. Kathy Foley. As a young woman in STEM, I loved being a mentor in the Curious Minds program. However, I did sometimes struggle with the idea that I'm encouraging girls to pursue a field that isn't as supportive as it could be. Should we be focusing on encouraging girls to pursuing STEM or addressing the leaky pipeline, or both?
Yeah, so look, I think it's really important that we should be encouraging young women to be involved in STEM. I think you'll find that, and you're seeing it across all careers, that Australia's still got a long way to go in order to have gender respect and diversity respect. And so it's not just science or STEM areas that have those issues. And it's something which I think in the last 12 months in particular, we've seen it becoming quite, and particularly in the last 6 months, quite a major issue in Australia. And it's hard. I mean, hard because just the way we are brought up, and it's the social and cultural norms, ones which are used to us thinking, particularly in gender, you know, the moment a child is born, what are they a boy or a girl, and then what gender they are is something that really defines how we relate to people. And that's so embedded that that's the thing which really worries me about that. However, and so that's where, yes, we want to try and change that, and I think we've come a long way, and we've still got a long way to go. But what we also need to do is make sure we support, particularly people who are in minority groups or in areas where they're not getting the same sort of advantages, that we need to make sure that we provide that support. And that's something which I think we haven't got right, particularly in the science in the STEM area, is I usually have a graph that shows career pathway for men is often straight up, sort of they going up and then plateauing when they get to their Peter principle, while for women we see their careers often plateau when they have children. And that's the part which we haven't nailed that yet. And it's something where I'm very keen to see how we can navigate this. Australia's, the government's appointed Lisa Harvey-Smith as the Australian Women in STEM Ambassador. And she has been doing some amazing things and really pushing for big major programs, which aren't just little bits of money, but things which are real significant, multi-million dollar programs to change the system. And I think she's been there for 2 years and already started collecting data and assessing things and identifying where can we really make a difference. So I actually think that we're on a pathway in the right direction. And what we need to do while we're improving, and hopefully it'll be less than 130 years, and that we'll be seeing something sooner, but we need to make sure we give young women and people who have disadvantage the skills, the resilience and strategies to be able to navigate the system so that they are able to be supported, because it can be pretty lonely if you think you're on your own. And I think we should be encouraging young women to be to take STEM subjects, because if you look at where future jobs are that are well paid, that have got sort of a longevity, it's in things like digital, AI, machine learning, space, quantum technologies, hydrogen, all those sorts of technology related areas, which is a great opportunity for Australia to be a very successful economy in the future. Not to mention, if you look at environmental areas as well, which need to have a whole lot of things that are there that, for example, environmental monitoring and consultancy looks like it's a very big growing area. And we need to make sure we've got people lining up and getting the right skills so that they can go into those sorts of jobs. And we want women to be in them too, because we know when women are involved and work, we know economies grow. And when women are also involved in the workplace, they are much more successful workplaces. And the results on all measures are better than ones where you don't have women involved. And then when you have the full diversity, which is truly inclusive, you get an even better multiplier again. So this is something which we really need to not be afraid to encourage young women, and also people from all diverse backgrounds to have the ability to at least have literacy in STEM, because it's so much a part of our lives.
Yeah, thank you. So just going into the section for diversity, and some of the questions here also are pointing towards diversity. So some of the answers might come through your responses. So the most recent STEM Equity Monitor report from the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources notes that women are represented in just 13% of STEM occupations, compared to 53% of the workforce in general, and that this has hardly improved in a decade. Why is the pace of change so slow? Who wants to answer? Any opinions? Who wants to go first?
Frances, do you want to go first this time?
Frances, yeah, you go.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question, because if we knew the answer, we'd be moving a little bit faster.
Yeah.
I also thought that the numbers were a bit higher than 13%. So maybe they're not including the M part, the STEM M, you know, because I've seen numbers.
It's one M. I have one M.
So maybe that's why. Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of it is sort of trying to break into a club. You have this club and then you don't see people like you in that club, so you don't kind of join it. That some people say you need about 30% of a large minority. You need about 30% to make people feel that they're part of this group. And I'm just going to give an example, because I know that Cathy's going to do this much better. But, you know, quite recently I was on a high-level panel for the EU, and, you know, I was feeling a little bit intimidated by all these other people who had far more, in fact, nature papers and, you know, really high H indexes and all those things that people use to intimidate you. And, you know, I'd occasionally speak out quietly and get ignored. And then I just loved it. This Swedish woman, she just said, "Excuse me, I'd like to hear what Frances has to say." And I thought, that was just so great and so empowering, right? You know, so she was making sure that I was getting heard. And we need to do more of that, you know, make sure that people are respected in the workplace, welcomed in the workplace and heard.
Yeah.
And so if you've got very small numbers of women, you don't aspire to joining that club. And maybe Cathy and Kelvin will comment a bit further.
Yeah.
So I can add something too, is that I think we lose a lot of women in that early career stage after they've finished their higher education training. And part of that is because of that's a time, if you look at, you know, sort of the traditional Australian situation, is that in your 20s you usually meet, you know, your partner or something, and you then buy a house, and then you want to go and have children. I mean, this is a classic, you know, very classic story, but it's not uncommon. And if you look at the situation for people having careers in science, the time in your 30s when, you know, most people, you know, many people in other careers are sort of getting more job certainty, they've got a, you know, clear pathway. Science is actually very, the pathways are very unclear. And also quite often they're quite short-term roles, like 3 years for a postdoc if you're lucky. And then you might have several of those before you might crack an ongoing role. And then only you actually end up getting into the university professor positions. So I think along the way, what happens is that we do lose women along the way because we haven't got the structures in place to support them at that critical time. And, you know, things like childcare, it's expensive. And so therefore women usually work part-time after they've had kids. And then we've got the problem that their work isn't seen as serious because they're working part-time. But then when they work full-time with young children, they're seen as not being serious mothers. So, you know, it can't be, you lose. So we've got to stop that sort of judgment, and we've got to support women knowing if anyone is working in science, it doesn't matter who they are, what hours they're working there because they're committed. And you don't know their backstory, and you don't need to know, you just need to accept that, you know, everyone's got a life, and when they're there, they're working. The other is, I think, we have a metrics system, and a lot of positions, of course, are competitive. And the metric system is designed for a very narrow part of the research population, and so that those in that narrow band get advantage, and as a consequence, they get, you know, a lot of the plum jobs and opportunities at that stage. And so what you end up seeing is women moving on to other roles, or moving out of science, or doing something completely different. And that's not bad either, because you can get, but I also want to make sure that we're not getting the average men and losing the fantastic women because we haven't set the system up right. But you can also, we also need to be aware that there are, many more jobs where we can use STEM education than just being in a laboratory in a university. And that's something where we need to look at what that might look like as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just a few things. There's many others as well. You've still got too many systems where the expectations of that hierarchical process and expectations of researchers to work 24/7 is not always easy when you've got a young family. And I think that also drives some women away. And I think we've still got far too much sexual harassment and bullying and harassment in general in the workplace, just across Australia in general.
Yeah.
And but it's, it is also present in the research sector, and it's something which we really need to put things in place to not accept that.
Yeah, that's true. Thank
Sorry,
you.
Kelvin, I'll just interrupt there, but Cathy reminded me that, for example, in science, we do have more than 50% women enrolled in our degree, but by the time you get to the postdoc level, it drops enormously, and that, corresponds to what you said about the mid-20s. And if women have alternatives, they will take them. If there's a better opportunity somewhere else, they'll go, and then science loses good talent.
Yes. Kelvin, did you have anything?
Can I be controversial?
Yeah, why not?
I'd like to add to the picture that's already been presented, because I think there are two components to it. The first component is the personal journey. And whilst we still have this system of we've just got to work at the individual level to encourage them to do something, we're never going to get the parity that we need. The more important system, which Prof alluded to, is more the structural imbalance that occurs. And at the moment, that if there is a selection bias that's occurring, the selection bias is towards white males who are wealthy. And that's where the plum rolls are. And that the part about this is that we need to value the diversity, but not only do we need to value diversity, we need as organisations to reflect internally to say, what are we doing which is actually creating this? So us sitting there as a science organisation, as a university body, as a college of surgeons, as a college of medicine, and saying that we value equality and doing nothing about our processes means that we are condoning this. So we need to actually turn it all upside down and actually say, well, okay, if we actually think this is a good idea to have training, how can we make training mandated so that there are different diversity or different ranges of way you can do that? If you apply for early career research fellowship, that there are mandated ones which have to be part-time, cannot be taken full-time. So people can apply for those, and they're only for those people who want to. And I also say that should be males and females. It doesn't have to be females. There's a lot of men these days do some wonderful work around the childcare space. In saying that, then there's also the component of that then to make sure that the decision-making, the leadership on the panels, the boards, the chairs have to have representation, which is beyond tokenism. I think particularly we see a lot of that tokenism, whether it be diversity, women, indigenous, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander. And I think that's where we've got to make sure that we turn that on its face so people actually see the ugliness of it. And the most important part of all this is that people think that diversity is just going to equal what we're trying to achieve. Diversity makes us a much better community, a much more productive community, and a much more successful community. Now, that alone should be enough incentive for organisations to actually change the way we're going to be, particularly in the field of science, where we actually want to get the best outcomes for the community.
Exactly. So you touched on diversity, that there's a lot of talent that in that pool. Have you faced and overcome bias in your own careers? I suppose the unconscious bias sometimes as well.
Well, I didn't used to think that it was there, and I think that came from, being a migrant child. I came to Australia as a small kid, and I was brought up in Broken Hill, and so I was kind of used to being different, but I felt that I was different. But the thing that I noticed was when I was studying for my PhD, I was younger and much more attractive, and I felt really welcomed by the male community. So you go to this condensed matter conference, and there'd be 3 women and 110 men. And so you got lots of attention. But I realized when I was older, that didn't happen. And so when I was younger, I wasn't really interpreting it as being included. But now I see why I was being included. And as I became more powerful, I was less included. So that's an interesting observation. And then the other thing that I would notice was for example, Kelvin mentioned, the what was it, the middle-class white male. So at CSIRO, I can remember going for a promotion, and my chief came back and said, you couldn't possibly have done all that. And, I felt really sorry for myself. And it wasn't until I got elected to the Academy of Science, and a former CSIRO director came up to congratulate me, and he said he was really pleased that I was elected to the Academy. He said, I still remember your chief of division saying, when they were deciding whether I was going to get promoted or not, saying it was a waste of time because nothing would become of her because she's a single mother. Oh. And, probably if I had known that at the time, I would have felt discouraged, but I was lucky I didn't know about it. But yes, there were occasions, and that was the most major one that I can think of, but I wasn't actually present at the time.
Yeah, that's very, very good to elaborate on the background and bias. Yeah. Cathy, do you have?
But having said that, CSIRO was a great environment. They gave me a day off a week to study. People did support me, but in many ways they supported me because I was young and needed encouragement. And then by the time you're in your 40s and things, and I'm getting a little bit more senior, I'm getting my PhD and stuff, I actually felt that I didn't have that encouragement. They liked me more when I was younger and less powerful, and they would take care of me. But the more senior I got, it kind of was discomforting. Yeah.
I've heard that before. Is it that the more senior you become?
Discomforting for both of us, yes.
Any comments there, Kelvin, Cathy, on this topic
you
about
go first,
bias?
Kelvin.
Any bias that you've experienced, unconscious bias?
Yeah, quite a lot every day. I think more so for my patients, I feel for that. There was an application form I had to fill out for one of my registrations recently, and if you put Professor and Aboriginal, it wouldn't actually process it. So a structural issue with there. Recently with the COVID stuff in hospitals, I walked into the hospital and was told that if you want to do deliveries as COVID time, you have to go around the back for the right area, not to walk through the front door. And this was a professor of surgery in my local institution, which I'm not necessarily a shy person. And it doesn't hurt me so much from a personal perspective. It hurts me because community members aren't able to speak up and actually be strong in that strength. And I think that unconscious bias is something that we really need to work hard on. I think from a career point of view in this conversation, one of the hard things going back to when we're talking about the imposter syndrome that we speak of is really the aspect of us being validated in the positions we are and not being in a position where people often get that lateral violence of you're only there because you're a woman. You're only there because you're Aboriginal. When in actual fact, as the Frances and Cathy articulated beautifully, is that you've done 10, 20 times the amount of work that any of them done. In your appointments, you've published more papers, you've done more work, you've done more programs, and yet they still justify it all by the mass media stereotypes that come through that. So I think one of these conversations, certainly one of the things that we need to make sure is out there in this conversation is that these things happen all the time, and it's just understanding that it does happen, and that lateral violence is something that we need to internalize and make sure that we deal with importantly, because people who are coming through our early career researchers, our early medicos that are coming through really get traumatized by that, and it's a horrible thing because then for the rest of your career you're feeling substandard in some ways when in actual fact you're amazing.
Yeah, you carry that stigma, don't you? Another question is this now going into the future. So what role can each of our audience participants, so this is all about participants right now listening, what can they play in improving diversity and equality in their workplace? What do you give advice to them?
Well, I think one of the first things is actually calling it out. So if you see someone doing something inappropriate, don't feel like you should step back and sort of turn away being embarrassed. You should actually step up and have those scripts in your back pocket of what you're going to say in a way that is just saying that that's not appropriate, because quite often people will then back off. No one likes being called out, but we need to, especially if you're in a position of privilege and you're seeing someone who is not being supported in the right way or being treated poorly, you need to speak up and say something, and don't walk past it. It's and if you feel like you're not had the strength to do that, don't be afraid to raise it with an appropriate person to say that this, you know, this is something I saw, and it didn't sit well with me, and it's so that's something that's really important. And the other is also thinking about my own actions every day, thinking I'm sure that I do things which I'm, you know, culturally developed in certain ways, and I know that I tread on toes or might do things which are insensitive, not that I'm meaning to, but being open to ask people to say, when I get it wrong, ask them to tell me so that I can improve and learn. I have a daughter out of law, I guess, my son's partner, who is from a Chinese Australian background, and it's something where I'm learning all the time about how, you know, you sometimes just have this casual racism which you don't even realize you're doing because it's so ingrained in everyday life. And I'm horrified to realize that sometimes there are times when I say things which are just so really inappropriate, and I thought I was culturally sensitive, but we all do that, and it's something where we need to ask, be willing to learn and be aware of it, and as well. And I guess the final thing is, and this is something which is a bit controversial, and I'd be interested to see what particularly Frances thinks, because you're sort of in the twilight career years as well, like me, is that we have to make room and step away to let others who are disadvantaged or have not, you know, from a diverse background and not had the same opportunities just because of their situation, to step away and make the room so they can be promoted and get a chance to have a go. I think particularly people who are in the, you know, narrow sort of Anglo-male role, that's something which is really hard to do, is let go of the power and let someone else have a go. But I think we do need to do that. And we've had our, you know, I've had my chance. It's now time for someone who's coming up and making sure that it is someone from a more diverse background to take on that role. So there's some of the things which come to mind for me.
I agree, Cathy. And it's something I've done when I've been in more senior positions. You know, people will argue that this person is better than that person, and often it's really hard to tell the difference. And I'll cast my vote for the minority one, because if it's hard to tell them apart, the minority ones had it usually tougher, right? Yeah. So I've sort of had that reaction. But I think it's really important to create a welcoming environment, and you have to be welcome and respected at work. Sometimes I've not stepped up, not said the right thing at the right time, but it's not too late to do it the next day. Everyone, you think of the response the next day rather than at that time. And I've decided it's better to face up and say something the next day.
Yeah. Kelvin, did you want to say something here? We're going a bit over time, but I think
I agree completely with that, and I really am disappointed I had the chance to share some committees or panels with Cathy and Frances. I'm really enjoying the conversation. That we must have avenues to call out the behaviours, and sometimes when you're an early career researcher and you're applying for grants, you don't want to speak up, because if you speak up, you're going to be called out, and that's that really delicate balance of, if you don't speak up, you're allowing that behaviour to continue. If you do speak up, you're considered a troublemaker. So it's really important for the leadership to make sure that we're the ones that's setting the standard, to make sure these things are all called out, so that they don't have to worry about those kind of things. So I think having conduits where you can actually express those kind of feelings that you're having, so that we can change the structures. And I think it's so, so important for positions of decisions and positions of power equally spread across diversity, which will make the organisation better. And I think that really takes a big step for many people in those roles to step away, to make sure they filled, or when they're near their twilight, that they step down and it's filled deliberately, to make sure that we get that diversity.
Yeah, that's good. Just with the diversity, there's a couple of questions here we should look at, because we've been talking about the question here about that not everyone's looking to complete a PhD. How do we consider better pathways for when we exit from school, vocational education and training in higher education. There's that question, and I combine it with another one below where someone has said that they've come back from teaching marine mid-career at 40, and now trying to restart their career. And I think there's another question around having become a parent and then trying to have the number of papers and publications. How do you get your postgrad career going? So yeah, just all those different micro segments. Do you have any advice there on what to do?
So maybe I can start with the vet area, is that we really need to have a whole lot more of people willing to do technical training, sort of experimental scientist type training in a whole range of areas. In fact, there's an extraordinary number of vacancies that we can't fill. And with the fact that we haven't got our borders open at the moment, we normally have by this time, I think there's about 300,000 skilled migrants that haven't come into the country since COVID started, which means that there's a skills gap. Now, one of the things is that often people realize that they might not have got exactly the right skills that they need. So looking for ways to have micro-credentialing is really important, to just shift your skills or be willing to learn, so that when you apply for a job, you may not have exactly the right job requirements, but because it's really hard to get people at all, this is a good chance for your employer to actually do the training and train you up to, because you've got the basis, so you just need to have the specifics in a particular area, particularly for vocational education and training, and also for people who have got bachelor's degrees. So that's something which I think is really important, is to don't be afraid to put your hand up and apply for jobs which are possibly a little bit, you feel like you don't have 100% surety that you've got the skills, because there's such a skills gap at the moment. If you're close or got part of it, there'll be a willingness to train you. And I guess the others, looking at having number of papers while you're trying to raise your children. If you look at my papers and everything like that, I'm an applied physicist. So I don't have a nature paper, and I don't have. If you looked at my publication record, you'd say it was spotty, because I was working more on applications and delivery. But also, I had a blended family of 6 kids along the way, and I just knew that I've been working for nearly 40 years as a researcher, and that you play for me, I've been playing the long game. And realizing that sometimes I have highs, sometimes I have lows, but also all the time, always knowing I'm doing quality work. I think it's for the area, and knowing that it's better to have, in my view, a few high quality things and lots of average things. And I think at the moment there is a bit of a challenge between volume of papers versus quality. And I think even though it's tempting to go for volume, quality is really what's important. And I guess what I have to do is fight the fight to make sure that it is quality and not volume, and that we take opportunity into account when we assess people's situation as well. So that's probably answering 2 questions. I'm not sure about the others. I've forgotten what they are.
Oh, well, there's something about in your 40s. So I started, I had a change of career in my 40s and became an academic. And I think I caught up. I mean, and now I'm retired. So I think you can come back. But I think research opportunity, what does ROAP stand for? Research output relative to opportunity. So many people interpret that as, oh, what was your career break? They don't interpret it also. What about these people who've had a leg up? Sometimes people do really well at the beginning because they had the leg up, and people don't take that into account. Anyway, well, that's my bit, because I felt I didn't have a leg up, perhaps, but yeah.
Can I just show you that picture? Just that one. Which
that picture, exactly. Yeah.
This shows it perfectly, is that that's what I want to get to, is that we have the no barriers. And you were talking about that leg up. It's that makes a huge difference, but we really should get to that point where we need to remove those barriers. Anyway, sorry, that's
really exactly right. good to see pictures. Kelvin, do you have any comments on
Yeah,
that?
I think similar to that, and again, extrapolating more from the conversation is that we need to value different things in different ways, and it's not always about a publication. And certainly in the area of community research, it's really important to value different things, and how we actually value those will depend on the organisation and the institution. So if you've got community workers, it's not about going in and doing a PhD and getting the work done. It's about engaging with the community, bringing them along in that journey with the research you're doing, and actually rewarding that through the translation, the outcomes they get. And then also how we value that. A big part of that then as researchers is that, and I don't know how we're going to value this, but something we need to do is that if you're a researcher and you get a community involvement, a migrant, a refugee, and you actually get them as a first author on your publication, and you've done a lot of work to actually achieve that, then that should be rewarded and acknowledged in some capacity, because that's part of the game as well. It's about how do you actually make sure that we're leveling the playing field so that people get that opportunity and access, rather than that old notion of, you know, I'm going to be the first author on all the papers, and changing that mentality in which we're doing that. And we start seeing that, you'll start seeing some of those structures change. And certainly for those who are coming back, or early career researchers or mid-career researchers, it's really making sure we're looking at what are we trying to achieve besides doing a paper. If you're just trying to publish a paper, then you're in the wrong game. Change jobs. We're in there to try and make a difference about some of the work that we're passionate about, and that's where the reward will come with that.
Absolutely. So now the next part is wanting to know about your next ambitions.
No.
Who wants to go first?
Well, I can tell you I'm working on a few things which I hope I can deliver while I'm in this role, because this is, I guess, the twilight years of my career. I'm in my 60s, so it's and it's time for me to sort of work towards this, and then probably step back and let others take over. But I guess the first thing is I'm hoping that I can see a whole new way of doing open access of research literature, and having it so that every Australian can read research literature for free, and that every paper that's published in Australia is openly accessed to the rest of the world. So I'm working on that, and I'm looking forward to getting that, so that it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, you can go hopefully through something like the National Library, and everyone can be able to read research literature, because we can get fake information easily, but we can't get proper stuff unless we pay for it. So, and yet we provide that research. So that's one of the things I want to do. And I guess another is I'm hopeful to see my research field is related to quantum technologies. I think there's a great opportunity for new industry for Australia, building on the fabulous research that's been done here for the last 20, 30 years. And working with the community, both business and research and government, to see if we can really spearhead that, just like they're doing for hydrogen. And I guess the final thing is seeing how we can work together as a community to deliver low emissions technologies, and really be able to deal with climate change properly, and think about what we as people, humans on Earth, need to do to change the way we work and live and play, and think about how we operate, so that we're also making our contributions as well. Yeah,
thank you. Kelvin, did you want to mention anything about your next ambition?
I have so many things on the plate at the moment that probably take up too much time. But from a STEM perspective, there are probably some really pertinent, proud work I'm doing at the moment, and that is how do we better value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in research and encourage them in that research.
Yes.
How do we value our traditional culture in this country to make it part of research and engage integrally in research, no matter what kind of research you're doing?
Yes.
And then the final part of that, which kind of ties in with it then, is how do we change the institutions and the structures to actually value this and encourage this, so that more people want to get in this area of research, for the not only the diversity, but for the disparities that we have and the inequalities we have. There must be so much work around this in many facets, whether that be career development, whether that be in a research capacity, or whether that be in translational outcomes for research. And I think all those things are something that I'm so passionate about. And this is where this is so exciting, because I think the next 5 to 10 years, we're rapidly changing in this space, and it's really exciting to see the people that I'm getting up that are, and I'm embarrassed to say this online, but the people that I'm mentoring in this research space are 20, if not 100 times better than me. They are incredible. So this next 5 to 10 years is just going to be a powerhouse of different research methodologies, a different research ethos, and certainly something which I hope will be a lot more engaging and culturally safe.
That's good. Thank you, Kelvin. So we got Frances about your next ambition, and please include, so everyone knows you've won all the awards, or pretty much. What else have you got your sights on?
I think I'm trying to make a difference for one person at a time. And so I have been helping people with, kind of mundane things, and not necessarily things that I really like doing, like, job applications and grants and prizes and awards and things. But I'd really like to get on an industry board, because I think industry is something that will change things a bit quicker than what government may. And I'm also president of the US Biophysical Society, and I've been really enjoying that role and changing policies and ethics and having working groups and, getting things done. So that's all pretty exciting. So maybe my next thing, I think the Nobel Prize is not really in sight, but I'm thinking about maybe Volunteer of the Year or Senior Citizen of the Year, something like that. Just one more award. I'll look forward to that.
That's really nice. Thank you. I'm so sorry I'm taking a lot of your time, but we've got you here, so we're just going to try and get as much out of you as we can. To everyone, what's your biggest piece of advice to them listening now?
Seize the opportunity. I mean, I didn't really plan a career, but I took opportunities, I took risks, but I also prepared myself for those opportunities by, getting the right qualifications and experience as well. But I didn't really go down that path, but it was recognizing an opportunity and taking it.
Yeah.
I'll probably just be a bit more open with mine and say that failure is okay. I've missed out on so many NHLRC grants, but I've wasted all my Christmases writing things. I've missed out on many grant opportunities and research opportunities. I've missed out on so many things, and I think I'm always stronger for the failures. And maybe it's my personality that being told that I can't do something. And so those who keep getting knocked down that are listening tonight, keep going, because it eventually happens. And people only pick up on your successes. They never actually air all the failures. And I've got plenty of them behind me that have made me stronger.
Thank you, Kelvin. Kathy?
Yeah, mine's probably a bit similar to Kelvin's, is that one of the things I learned probably too late in life is that it's no use blaming. When something goes wrong, use it as a learning opportunity. So I'm sort of big on the turn lemons into lemonade person, so that if something goes wrong and you miss out on an opportunity, as Kelvin said, you apply for something, you don't get it. I think if you see any person who is in a role that they're in, they won't have just glided in there. They would have tried lots and lots of times. I know any major role I've had, I've applied for multiple times. I've, sort of had things where I aspired to opportunities that just didn't happen. And you use each one of those knockbacks as an opportunity, or when something goes bad for you and you have a situation that doesn't work, that you look at what can I learn and who can I blame? And it really turns things around and builds your resilience. I think if you can turn around the idea from being a victim to being someone who learns and survives and pushes forward with resilience, it's good for your heart, but people also, and your soul and your ability to really engage. But the other is people really notice it and really admire that, so that and they want to know and want you to be part of their team. And I think that's something which probably I learned a bit later in life, but has really worked well for me.
Thank you. Well, tonight we've got you all here. Thank you so much. You've shared your passion. Love how you talked about quality, not volume, respecting and valuing your peers, and going out there